This is the Hofstra Radio Alumni Audio Yearbook. Today is May 22nd, 2024. Please tell us your name and the years you were at Hofstra Radio.
My name is Daniel Gall. I was at Hofstra Radio from 2020 to 2023.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming here and sharing your memories. And I think you are at least in the top three for most recent graduates I've spoken to for this. So thank you for bringing a young perspective and some recent experience. A lot of the people I speak to go, "It's been a long time since I was an undergrad or I was at the radio station." So you have no excuses this time. I
Yeah,
went I
thank you
went
for having me. And I'll say I've been graduated for about 6 months now, and I share that I feel like it's been a very long time since I've been there. So I got the mentality down.
All right, all right. You're in the right place then. Um, what shows and programs did you work on at the station?
When I was at WRHU, my sole focus was news, which is funny because when I originally wanted to go to WRHU, I wanted to do sports, Islanders, everything. But since I was in the COVID year, when there were no sports, the only thing that was available was news. And as soon as I did my first Newsline broadcast, I very quickly fell in love with the industry, the production, everything that it takes from creating a rundown to executing interviews on air. It was amazing. So I done everything news, a bunch of special broadcasts. I done the morning show a couple of times, but my baby was Newsline, Monday through Friday.
Okay. Did you have any titles or positions at the station?
I was the director of news content production, as an AB member, and then I was the director of talk programming, on the EB.
Okay. When you were on the air, did you have any nicknames or on-air personas?
I wish. There were a couple cool people that had a couple really cool names while I was there, but I never found a really creative one that I could nail down for myself. So no on that one. But if I had a chance to go back again, I would definitely come up with a couple better names than what I had thought of back in the day.
Any chance you would share any of those?
Is
It's okay.
what I had thought of, which was really bad, was like, if I were to do music, my name is Daniel Gall. I'd say maybe like DJ D Gall. And I'd use that a couple of times and people thought it was funny, but never would I have gone on air and said that. So this is our probably the first and last time that name will be shared on air.
I like it. And the history teacher in me says, "Oh, it's like Charles de Gaulle," and that's not what you're going for at all.
No,
So,
exactly.
all right, sorry about that. I ruined it. I made it even
No, not at
worse.
all. See, it just goes to show that it was a wise choice to not use that nickname for myself.
All right. So let's go back to the beginning. It's a two-part question. Answer whatever makes sense to you, and obviously in your situation it may be a little bit different. What first brought you to the radio station, and then when you got there, what was going on? What was the station like? Do you remember meeting anyone?
Um, well, I remember what it was. I remember what brought me there, and it's funny because so I'm from Queens in New York City. I never had the dream of getting the college experience of going to some, football school in the South or, something like that where I was going away. I understood that, you're in New York City, the biggest city in the world, and any opportunity you want for any job in any field is here. So I very quickly knew that I didn't want to go away. So it made choosing a college very easy because it went down to Adelphi, St. John's, and Hofstra universities, all of which are on Long Island and in New York City. Um, so my mom and we talk about this all the time. When I had gone to the open house at Hofstra, as a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, excited high school senior, we I knew what I didn't want to do. I knew that I hated the concept of engineering. I knew that I wasn't going to be a doctor. I knew that I wasn't going to do a bunch of things. Um, but then we came across a communications table, and we saw, WRHU, and spoke to a couple interesting people telling us about their experience at the radio station. And we were like, well, this is the first thing that, really caught my attention. We went down to the station, And I'll never forget this conversation that I had with John Mullen, who is now the general manager of WRHU.
Hmm.
At the time, he was the director of operations, I believe. And I mean, just my mom and I left that conversation thinking this guy knows what the hell he's talking about.
Hmm.
We need to follow here and we need to come here. Um, and and I mentioned earlier that, when I was looking to go in, it was actually for sports broadcasting. It was the Islanders were pretty hot. They had been telling me all about this cool stuff that they were doing in sports, so I was like, "This is where I want to be." And the more that I experienced it, and kind of researched it and listened, the more that I kind of found myself at home. Now, I was the class of 2020 in high school, which means that I was the first COVID class rising into Hofstra,
Hmm.
and I was on a Zoom call for orientation, which was miserable because it was 3 days of orientation on Zoom.
Hmm.
And one of the deans hopped on a call and was like, "Hey, we have a WRHU summer training class. If anyone wants to do it, reach out." And I was like, "Oh, great," because I thought it was going to only be in the fall. So I put in my name. Within a week, got an interview. Next thing I know, I was doing this summer class, at my house, learning radio. So that was it was interesting. And talking to like Bruce Avery at the time, and Sarah Hendricks and all them, they were always telling us how historic this summer training class via Zoom was, because it was the first one they've ever done remotely. And we really felt that. So, to your second question, what was it like? Well, it was like having to learn how to use a board without ever seeing one. It was part of it was intrinsically very scary, because you're supposed to get cleared for engineering as a requirement for you to pass, but you have no clue what
Hmm.
it looks like, and you can't even go to the station even though you live 20 minutes away, because of COVID restrictions. So it was very interesting, but I think that kind of hurdle of adversity, for myself and the other people of that training class specifically, really did, have a great impact on us, because we got to learn a lot of other skills that maybe we wouldn't have, explored otherwise. The funny part is that, the main part of that training class to teach you how to use the board. And I think I went like until I became a manager of the news department about 6 months later, did I even want to go to learn it. I was able to go 6 months without doing, even touching the on air button on the board, let alone, operating and running a full show, which I can imagine for you and some of the other people who you've interviewed is like a shock. So
Hmm.
it was interesting. So to answer your question in a very short, what was it like? It wasn't radio, but we got it done. It was a really interesting, amazing experience to go and learn.
I think one of the big themes of all these interviews, whether it's people who were there in 1962 or 1982 or 2022, was that there's always a sense of an underdog mentality with
Mm,
Hofstra Radio, and even with the more elaborate facilities, there's always a sense that we're doing more with less, or we're taking opportunities that other people may have passed by, and um, so many people of your generation have had these amazing facilities at Hofstra to deal with, but then you've got this hurdle, you've got this other
mm,
underdog situation that you've got to overcome. And we're, I guess what I want to get back to is, as you're signing up for this training class on Zoom, was it more or less incentive to do it in this unique environment? Were you more motivated to try something new because it was so weird and different, or was it kind of off-putting?
Well, so as I mentioned, I did like sports, but like news was the driving like factor for me always. I always thought it was very fascinating. So at that time was, it was the 2020 election, and I had understood very quickly that if I were to do a fall training class, you would really only get approved and ready to go and really get your hands dirty, you know, late October, maybe even after the election is over. They always
Hmm.
find ways to involve the new trainees in all the fun projects that are going on. But I realized that, like, if I could do this summer training class, I would be able to get involved with that experience, which I did.
Mm,
and that was very rewarding. Um, but I mean, listen, it was definitely a challenge. I think the scariest part was, hopping on a Zoom call with, you know what, I take that back. What I the biggest takeaway that, like, I really miss, Bruce Avery gave his classic, like, "I like to sleep" night speech,
hmm
you know, and it just over Zoom, it didn't have the same effect. I remember I sat down in one of the subsequent training classes, maybe 2, 3 semesters later, and I heard it in person. And then you're like, wow, this is, that resonates. That was the one experience that I regret not having when I was, a freshman sitting in that Zoom
mm,
call. But otherwise, I think that it was, I was always motivated and I wanted to do this. And since it was a drawing, factor of why I came to Hofstra, as soon as I had the first opportunity, I jumped on it because I knew this is what I had to do.
mm, wow, that's amazing stuff. Now, you've mentioned a couple times your interest in sports broadcasting. Were you doing stuff in high school? Were you doing like high school games, or was this just something in your mind that you thought seemed kind of cool?
Yeah, not at all. I was a baseball player, so my whole life was sports. But I remember just hearing a couple of the kids talk about their experiences and what they did, and I was like, this is awesome. That was literally the draw.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, I can see the appeal. So, gosh, I have a million questions about the
Shoot.
training class and so forth. But I guess basically, you first, how often were you doing the class? The second, how long were the classes? And three, how did you figure out like, okay, I'm ready to do this, and I'm ready to put it in on addition tape or however you needed to get cleared?
Um, the class was once a week on Wednesdays.
Okay.
It was about an hour long.
All right.
Funny enough, I was a lifeguard at the time, and what I had done to prepare, because again, it was all, since there was no like engineering clearance, it was, just passing the exams that they had given me at the end. So I had a notebook with all my stuff in it, and after I would finish the Zoom classes, I would go and work at the pool, and then whenever I would be at the kiddie pool, when there's no little kids there, I'd sneak out my notebook and study.
Hmm.
That's a memory I remember very vividly. It was the way that it went, I remember hopping on a phone call with John Mullen, and I believe it was our personnel director at the time, Natalie Kate, and they just said, "Okay, well, we emailed you a script. Go read it, and this is your announcing clearance." And I was like, "Oh man," So we did it all over the phone, and then we got it done, and that was very. I remember hearing John Mullen tell me that you're cleared, and I was like, "Wow, okay," And then otherwise for engineering, like I said, I mean, I didn't do that for about 6, 7 months. It was interesting though, again, to watch the other people who came after me have the in-person experience, and
Mm.
then you realize, like, oh my God, like this was so different from what you went through. But in the moment, nothing really seemed out of the ordinary because everything was out of the ordinary, if that makes
Mhm.
sense.
100%. Everything was abnormal at the time, and you just had to deal with it and
Yep.
and move on. So I guess once people start coming back to the station in person, did you have an in-person training class to run the board or do production, or was it just assumed that you had enough experience that you could handle things?
Some people, I think it was very individual because there were some people from my training class that I know, I think maybe didn't even touch a board until their third year, maybe.
Mm,
Whereas, like, since I became a manager within the news department, they kind of forced me to get that clearance. And I say forced in a very positive connotation. It was a very helpful tool to learn and I'll share a quick piece. Currently, I'm a communications director for a Long Island politician, and my latest project has been to build him a satellite TV studio. And it's funny because I used to really resent the concepts of television,
hmm
but having to do this project on my own, I really go back to my basics of learning what is audio, where does it go, how to use a board, and all these types of things that, like, I really didn't want to learn or care to learn when I was younger. But having that experience really changed my ability to, perform in the real world, quote unquote. So it's been really rewarding after the fact, looking back to see that. But I mean, listen, I mean, the other people that I was with, whether they did it or not, did it on an individual basis. And some of the people that were in my training class, who just graduated as of 2 weeks ago, were some of the most talented engineers that we had in my year. So definitely something that it was a hurdle to overcome, but something that I think that we overcame collectively, and those who really wanted to perfect the skill were able to do so.
Hmm. So when everyone's coming back in person at the station and you're meeting in the flesh some of the people that you, I guess, got to know a little bit
Mm.
through these Zoom meetings, what was that like? What was that experience like? Oh, I heard your name, or I saw your picture on Zoom. What was that experience like?
Yeah, it was yeah, that's a great question. I remember meeting Eli Finkelstein for the first time, who she was the station manager, I believe, for 2 years. Uh, I had when she had been station manager, she was a senior when I had just kind of really gotten involved. I remember meeting her for the first time because this is like a scary person who, like, you saw on Zoom, and they have this title, and like they're so cool, and they have all these cool internships, and you're just a newbie. I remember seeing her in person for the first time, and she has an amazing voice. Um, and it was just like it was almost like a celebrity type effect, even though these are your peers. And she was one of the, you know, she was an amazing mentor for me, and she was great. But I remember meeting her for the first time and like, oh my god, like this is not only is it a real person, but like they're even cooler in person.
Hmm.
That was an experience that, like, again, you wouldn't have had otherwise. You always kind of like have that, like, sort of inspiration and admiration for those people who are running those training classes. But I remember meeting her on Zoom and then meeting her in person. You're like, whoa, like you're even more amazing in person. And yeah, the same thing with, like, again, just being able to like talk to Bruce and talk to John and talk to Sarah in person. You like really put the picture that they're trying to paint much better, because they're it just having those conversations were just always, you know refreshing, and you always learn something. And then that meeting them in person for the first time really did have that effect. Not something I think about frequently. That's actually a really great question that got me thinking there. But definitely, it's an experience for sure.
Yeah, yeah, it's a very unique experience, and that's I'm really thrilled that you would share that because we all went through something not too long ago, and in some ways we've all put stuff behind us and we're moving on and moving forward, but at the same time we're kind of carrying it with us. And for those people who were
Absolutely.
at home and doing their own thing, how does that compare to their experience and what they went through? So I appreciate that. And I want to continue in the same vein. You had
Of
the good
course.
fortune to talk to John Mullen before you came to the university, and what a great introduction to radio. I mean,
Yeah.
what a mentor, what an accomplished career he had. But I also want to talk about Bruce Avery
Mhm.
because when Bruce started at the university when I was graduating, so we overlapped a little bit and kept in touch over the years. And various people had various impressions of Bruce. Sometimes he was real tough at the beginning. Sometimes he was kind of a softie at the beginning. Sometimes he was somewhere in between. Where what was Bruce like when you first met him in person?
Yeah, it's funny because I had gone to create a very good relationship with Sarah Hendricks
Hmm.
and John Santucci. I believe it's like 2010 class, something like that.
Yep. Yep.
Who I still keep in touch with, both of them to this day, and they talk about their experiences with Bruce. And then I compare them to mine, and they said that when we had him, he had already, he'd gone soft on them compared to what he had been bringing to the table back when John and Sarah were there. So it's always funny, and the way you just posed that question is a very similar kind of tone. Bruce was amazing. I mean, he was one of the people who, I think, some of the things that he said to me, I still think about to this day, still resonates with me. Um, it's funny because I don't know, I don't remember the first time I met him, but I can definitely share some of the experience that I had with him that for me were truly moving. There was two in particular that really, you know, shaped me. The first one is kind of funny because I would say that this was my first real interaction with him as a student manager and um, as like a general manager student. So I had been producing a news special on the Israeli elections, which back in that time, I think the government had just collapsed, or they had been going on a
Mhm.
couple different. They weren't able to form a coalition government multiple times, so I done a special about it. And when I had done, I think it was the third election or the fourth election, and I did the whole thing. I booked a bunch of interviews. I had like someone from the Israeli consulate, and I had experts, and it was amazing, all by myself, and it was awesome. And then, I had done it, and I sent it to him. He says, "Great job." A week later, we have our softball game, and he goes, "Hey, meet me on Monday in my office, and just think of this word, casted, CASTED." And I'm like,
Hmm.
okay, thank you. See you Monday. So then I walk in, and again, I'm big chested. I'm proud. I just, I had a huge win. He hits play. I say my first sentence, which goes along the lines of like, Israelis just casted their ballots, and then he stops it, and then he's like, "Casted is not a word." And I was like, and he's like, "It's cast," and then I'm like, "Huh." And I don't know why, but that experience stuck with me forever because I just remember like getting humbled, but also in the same breath, he was so supportive, and he was like, he just helped me create something that was so much better than what I originally thought of it. And that was just one funny story of his that was truly just something that sticks with me. And the other thing, the word of advice that he gave me, I had gotten an internship. I worked for Congressman Lee Zeldin as an intern, and I got that job on his gubernatorial campaign while I was serving as the program director, and I ended up getting hired full time after a month on the team, and I had to step down from my programming position just because of the time commitment, and I wanted to make
Hmm.
sure that I was, fully there. And then Bruce, I went telling that I had to step down, and he was fully supportive, but he said, just listen, I have one piece of advice for you. He's like, God gave you two ears and one mouth for a reason. It's because you need to listen and don't talk. And again, you sit there and you're like, okay, thanks, and then you move on. But the more I thought about those words and the more I implemented those words, the more it made me successful. And it's words that I still think about to this day. So, Bruce's impact on me was, remarkable. And I remember he had retired, um, I think he had retired the same year that I had become program director. So I remember sitting in the executive board meeting where that was announced, and like it was just shock because you understood that a legend at the station was stepping down. And then he unfortunately passed away a couple months after that. And I remember all that going down. But he was a mentor. I felt very lucky to be as a part of the last people who were really able to um, benefit and grow from his expertise and his mentorship. And I'm very thankful for him, and I will be forever.
Hmm. Thank you so much for sharing all that. And it's a classic Bruce style to not necessarily ruin your weekend and say, you made this mistake or you could have done this differently, but to sort of plant a seed and say, oh, we got to talk about something. So at least he gave you the weekend to enjoy and then, crush your
Exactly.
spirit on Monday, which is, what Mondays are for, right? But no, that's a great way, and that's a great anecdote. And thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
And
of course.
yeah, a lot of wise words there. So let me ask you again a very unique question. I think for yourself, do you remember getting on the air the first time? I guess after your training class, and then was there a separate first time you got on the air when you were actually in the studio?
So this is actually a great question because I do remember vividly the first time I was on air. I had gone about 3 months because remember within news the processes of going on air. You start as a writer. I remember the first time that a piece that I written verbatim was read on air, and I remember my heart sinking to my stomach hearing someone read what I'd written. And it's funny because you say, "Oh, it's just like it's a college radio station and it's all this," but it's like you're like, "Whoa!" Like your words, not only do they have a lot of meaning, and it's a very important, to this day, like that every word you say has a lot of meaning. But I remember sitting there and hearing another anchor read what I wrote, and you're like, "Wait!" Like if you write something wrong here, they look bad and the station looks bad. So having that pressure from day one was something that I always learned from. But by the time I became an anchor, it was at the end of that semester, and the first opportunity to be able to anchor was actually President Joe Biden's inauguration.
Wow.
And so I was on air. Since I'm in Queens, it was like just before the spring semester had started, so no one was here. So they were like, "We need a third anchor. Like, do you want to come?" And I was like, "Sure." And I just
Wow.
remember, and all the studios, you were by yourself because of social distancing. So the way it was hooked up, there was two anchors in Studio South with an engineer. No, sorry, there was an anchor engineer, and then there was myself who was sitting by himself in phone booth. So I was just by myself, kind of staring at the wall all night. But I remember like almost shaking as I was reading my first story, and that was quite the experience. But I was with Eli Finkelson and another person. I believe it was Connor. Forgot his last name, but it was a pretty interesting experience, and it was a really important broadcast. The only inauguration that I was a part of in my college years, so it was definitely something that was important. It was impactful, definitely scary in the moment, but it was a lot of fun at the same time. It was a great first experience into all this.
Yeah, that's rather amazing, and I think the unique circumstances and your willingness to jump in and try things, they're all testament to what a wonderful opportunity that was. Because some people wait, a couple of years for their chance to do an inauguration or to do an election on that scale, and this is
Exactly,
this is your opening salvo. So top
exactly.
that.
Yeah, and actually, funny enough, I actually just remembered this now. So we used to use a messaging platform called Slack to communicate.
Hmm.
So I remember after I read my first or second story, I was very nervous. So I was like kind of like breathing heavy, kind of not like breathing, but I was kind of like like taking a deep breath, like good job, you just did that. And then I noticed that my mic was on. So Eli had actually dropped in the Slack chat. It's like, who's breathing so hard? And in the moment I didn't respond, but if she listened to this, I confess it was me.
I'm pretty sure she figured it out at some point, but there's only so many available targets. Um, but
Exactly.
yeah, I mean, you got through it, and that's just fantastic stuff. So I mean, you're doing all these things, you're taking these opportunities as they come, and that's very laudable. But at some point, did you get comfortable being on the air? Did you feel like, oh, I'm good at this? Was there a light bulb moment, or did you just realize after some time that you could do it?
Yeah. Again, I always saw it as something that I enjoyed and that I found fun and that was an experience. There was other people that were truly talented around me that had just incredible voices for radio. And I just don't have that.
Mm.
My voice just doesn't get that deep. But, I just thought it was a lot of fun. I got very comfortable. I think doing the morning show, which was a much more kind of freer, opinionated type show. I enjoyed that a lot. But what I really found my passion for within 6 months of becoming a student manager, especially because I mean I started news in October and I became a manager in January. So I really worked really hard those first 2 months, and I was very lucky and very proud to have gotten that achievement. But in my role, a big part of it was like booking interviews.
Mm.
So I really enjoyed that aspect more as opposed to like being talking on air. I really enjoyed landing that big fish interview and having the ability to talk to very interesting people with different stories on air, which I think that you see that a lot more with some of the with some of the community programming that we do. When you see like Basha, Eileen, Josephine, they talk to really interesting people that like I never really had the ability to do so. And I think that that experience for me was much more rewarding than actually being on air. Because again, like to this day, what I do for work is essentially booking. Just on the flip side, because I do it for a politician, fielding inquiries as opposed to reaching out to try and book certain guests for certain shows. So that was for me one of the most exciting things. And I think that I had booked. I mean, I'd kept track, but I think like within like 6 months or within like the year, I'd booked well over like 150 interviews, like unique guests. I mean, we were grinding that year, and that to me was the most rewarding experience. I mean, we had done like in that year, I think it was 2021. We had done like it was a year after it was 1 year since COVID, so we had done like a crazy like 4 part 4 hour news series about COVID, going about on a bunch of different things, booking interviews ranging from like I don't even know how we found these people. I mean, we had like some like woman call in from Germany, and we had like the Australian consul general call in. Again, they're just really random people that I don't know how we booked at the time,
Hmm.
looking back at it, but it was fun, And then that summer following, it was the 2020. It was the 2020 Olympics that were taking place in 2021. Myself, I had a bunch of. It was myself, Yao Bonsu, who's one of the most. He was in my class, one of the most outstanding people I got to work with at the station. Samantha Seivert, who had worked with on the news board, and then Shayna Sangstock, who is a really good friend of mine, who has taught me a lot of stuff with tech. We put together this like 2 hour. It was called the pre-Olympic Newsline. Where we just like interviewed Olympians and like all these different kinds of people. I mean, we had booked like a bunch of NBA players who were going to play for Team USA, and it was just a bunch of really interesting stuff that for me was the most rewarding. So the on-air aspect was a lot of fun. I always enjoyed it. I was very comfortable very quickly because, as you can tell, as all radio people are, we love to talk.
Uh-huh.
But at the same time, that experience for me was more rewarding.
Wow. As you were talking about booking guests, and you mentioned earlier Sarah Hendricks, and she and I have had a couple of conversations, and she helped connect us here. One of the
Yes.
things that she said she really enjoyed doing, both in her Hofstra life and her professional life,
Mhm.
is booking guests and finding, people to talk to, interesting people to talk to. Did you learn much from her, or what were your interactions like with Sarah?
I don't know how to answer this question in a way that won't understate everything that she did for me. Sarah was by far the most amazing influence that I had. Without Sarah, I don't know where I would be today. We connected very early on because, she is a very hardworking individual who respects hard work, and never said no to anything. She not only would I come up with ideas, but even when I would come up with ideas, she would say, "Well, what about this, this, and that?" And I'm like, "Sarah, but look what I just did." She's like, "That's not enough. You have to do this, this, and that."
Mm.
And she was remarkable. I mean, without her, and I remind her this very often, as much as I can, that without her, I would not have, achieved the success in a very short time the way that I did. And I don't even say it. I don't even say that in a gloating fashion. Just without her, she really helped me, not only achieve the goals that I was looking to achieve, but absolutely smash through those goals and keep striving higher and higher every time. And I really do. She's awesome.
Mm.
So what did I learn from her? I don't think there's something that I could say that I didn't learn from her. I mean, she was the person that we're in a college environment at this point where news had gone essentially offline. I mean, you did everything remotely, everything via Zoom, via this, and she's like, "Well, there's news happening 10 minutes from campus. Why aren't you there?" And all these and that type of mentality that I think that a lot of students in my 4 years couldn't really tap into because it's just not something that you learned right off the bat, and it's something that she really did try to drill into everyone's heads that like you need to like if you want to do news, if you want to do hyper local news correctly, then go out and talk to these people. And I because of that I made some amazing connections who I still keep in touch with to this day.
Mm.
From the local politics scene, that really helped me out, and then I still work with very often. So she was amazing, and all the stuff that she had like done, like I want to be able to do without her guidance, because you're like, all right, well, here we go. Like I have this idea. And then it's like, well, your idea is good, but here's what you need to do to make it great. And then once you can make it great, here's what you do to make it even better. So, her mentality, her mindset, her everything is just incredible. And I was very lucky to have a mentor like Sarah, who I still, very frequently will reach out to her for advice. And she's always, one, answers the phone, and two, just knows exactly what to say when I need to hear it. So she's awesome.
Wow. Wow. So you've got John Mullen talks you into joining the station. You've got John and Sarah and Bruce training you. You get all this great advice from Bruce. Sarah, indispensable. What an amazing opportunity. What a great
Yeah.
bunch of mentors to have. And I kind of like to go back to, all those years ago when you started, he said sarcastically, but when you first started at Hofstra Radio, what did you hope it would be then? And after all this experience, what was it to you?
Yeah, it's a great question that I was thinking about a lot. Um, the funniest part is in the moment. you think this is, college radio. You're doing whatever you can, and you're just talking with friends, and you're doing cool stuff, and that's what it was. But very quickly, and I think again because of their leadership, and there were other student role models around me who had, like Eli. My goal from day one was to just become her.
Mhm.
And because she was the first impression that I had, and and she was a great role model, and there were others that I'd gotten to meet throughout my journey, that I very quickly learned that this is much more than that, but it's only if you treat it that way. Like if you want to go to WRHU, and you want to hop on, the 12 to 1 p.m. alternative nation slot and do 6 mic breaks an hour, and that's all you want to do, you can do that. But if you want to go out, get in the field, and do all this amazing work, you can. I mean, this year in the spring, one Yao Bansu, who I mentioned earlier, also so Yao was one of the people that I met. He came in the training class after me, and just from day one this kid was a dog. I mean, he's one of the hardest working people I've ever met. And like, I mean, his dream from day one was to cover the Super Bowl, and here you are through WRHU in February of 2024 covering the Super Bowl in Vegas. So like, you have that different type of opportunity that you can really tap into if you choose to do so. But looking back now, at this point, 4 years removed from my first day in the training class, 6 months removed from my last day at Hofstra. I mean, the station was everything. I mean, both of my internships that I'd gotten were amazing, and I wouldn't have gotten my second internship or my first one. My first internship, I worked for the Consul General of Israel in New York, that I got through booking those Israeli specials that I mentioned to you earlier.
Mhm.
And then because of the skills I learned, reaching out to contacts and stuff like that, I was able to get my second internship with Congressman Zeldin, who I still work to this day. So it's stuff like that that, looking back, you think to yourself, what does this mean to you? I mean, it literally was everything, because the skills that I learned there. I mean, the kids that are in RHU were just running laps around the other kids in the journalism department who just didn't have that experience. And that to me is everything. So, and there are people that I talk to. I mean, I texted John Santucci this morning just saying, hey, like, you have any advice on this specific thing that I'm looking for advice on? And he answers the phone and he's like, yeah, here's what I can help you out with. And I talk to friends and people that I can still to this day, that you think, you know what, nah, these are kids that you're just going to college with, but really they're now professionals in the real world, doing what they want to do, and you're doing what you want to do, and it very frequently collides. And having those contacts, those relationships, and that ability to not only tap into that, but to actually, you know, explore with them, and learn everything together. It's been remarkable. So to answer in short, after this 2 minute speech, what was it? It was everything. And I'm very proud of what I'd accomplished at WRHU. It's funny because, looking back at all the battles that I'd won and the little achievements, they seem small now. In the moment, they were huge, but they all had their own way of contributing to what has become a very great start to my very young career. And I will never, I'll always be very thankful to, Bruce, Sarah, John, and all my friends who I met, who helped me to get to this point, and beyond. Because without this experience, I don't know where I'd be right now.
Wow. Wow. Well, thank you for that amazing testimony, for your experience, and thank you for sharing your very unique experience. For those of us who were not at the station at the same time, whether they hear this in a couple of weeks or a couple of years, you've given us a little time capsule of what things were like, and getting started at the station, and it's really invaluable. So I'm terribly grateful, for you sharing those stories. And I've got a whole bunch more questions, and I have a feeling we can talk someday again, and share some more stories.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, and feel free to reach out whenever. I'm happy to continue to talk, and I'll go back and listen to your podcast too, so I can learn more about you before our next conversation.
All right, deal.